John Donohue's debut novel is set in the well-trodden period of World War II in the bleak, oppressive inhumanity of Camp Auschwitz. Jewish prisoner Emil Clement is brought to the camp and separated from his family. He is forced into factory work by the Nazis and must barter in the prison's unforgiving economy for food. When he discovers that chess is being played among some of the prisoners, he decides to buy his way into one of the games using his skill as a watchmaker. Emil Clement earns a reputation as an unbeatable chess player, and word of his skill at the game spreads. Parallel to his story, the SS officer Paul Meissner has coincidentally set up a chess club for games between low-ranking soldiers and the Auschwitz officers. When the Nazis catch word of this supposed unbeatable Jewish chess player, they decide that there cannot be such a thing, and so organize a match between Emil Clement and the Nazis' best players, using sinister leverage to force Emil to play. The Death's Head Chess Club straddles a very strange line between the meticulous realism of a historically accurate setting such as World War II-era Auschwitz, even complete with direct references to real historical terms from the camp such as Musselmen, and time-appropriate figures such as Otto Adolf Eichmann, Rudolf Hoss, and Arthur Lebehenschel, and the contrasting unreality of the story's premise. Donohue states, somewhat blithely in the endnotes on historical accuracy, that he has seen no record of any chess ever being played in Auschwitz, although he also says that he has never seen a record that explicitly states that chess had never been played either. That second point of Donohue's seems like a vapid attempt to at least acknowledge the dissonance that arises in his novel between realism and fantasy. The story of chess being played in Auschwitz is entirely fabricated, obviously. The unreality of the story's premise can be recognized simply by looking at the title of the book, and so this is a rare example of a piece of historical fiction that has a surprisingly high bar for the audience's suspension of disbelief in this genre. Unfortunately, that bar is often not met, and there are several very obvious concessions made in the realism in order to support the novel's fictional elements. For example, it's questionable that if the Nazis thought there shouldn't be an unbeatable Jewish chess player, then it seems more plausible that this echelon, famous for its willingness to remorselessly murder people en masse, would have simply killed Emil Clement instead of setting up a game to be played between him and one of theirs. Even the very characters of the novel are at times aware of this. The novel's best scenes actually have nothing to do with chess at all, but rather take advantage of the familiar history in order to build tension, bleakness, and horror from what the reader knows about the setting. One scene in particular doesn't feature the characters relevant to the main plot of the story at all, but focuses on a group of Jewish prisoners arriving at and being introduced to a new life at a Nazi work camp. The reader, who knows the history, will pick up either immediately or early on what is actually happening, and will read the rest of the scene with a deep-seated terror as the prisoners are herded unknowingly into gas chambers to be slaughtered. It's an effective scene, which is contextualized in what the reader has already been told about the machine-like efficiency of killing that the Nazis, and in particular Adolf Eichmann, are famous for. It's also relevant to the stories of Emil Clement, whose life hangs in the balance of this Nazi machine, and Paul Meissner, the one good German, so to speak, who had previously tried to argue for the prisoners to be kept alive and treated fairer. Scenes such as this show that the novel is at its best and most interesting when it embraces the history of the setting. You can tell that the history was the biggest interest for author John Donohue, but unfortunately the scenes and sections of the novel that really work in this respect are in the minority. This is especially true as the novel stretches on, and the second half of the story forgoes the bleak, oppressive tone of the setting in order to tell a much more awkward and predictable story. The chess theme of the novel wasn't as prominent or well realized an inclusion as the title and premise led me to believe, which may be a consequence of the setting. The major focus of the novel is the human experience of the Jewish prisoners suffering in Auschwitz. It's a striking theme that demands examination and attention from both the author and the reader, so much so that perhaps the inclusion of any additional main themes, especially one as unreal as a chess club held amongst the prisoners of Auschwitz, would necessarily be relegated to secondary focuses for fear of mixing up the story's priorities. The history of the setting is well researched and realized, with real German terms for officer rankings used to address the characters and an abundance of footnotes explaining extra details to further educate the readers. Meanwhile, the chess theme is bare bones. A good number of chapter titles are named after chess moves, which is sometimes meant to be a metaphor for the focus of the chapter, but can also sometimes be simply because the move is featured explicitly in the chapter. Aside from this, there is very little inclusion of chess theory, game theory, strategy, or even chess matches in the story. Egregiously, in the very first scene in the novel that features a chess match, the match is not even summarized for the reader. Aside from the first few moves, the reader is merely told that Clement is playing defensively, his opponent was playing aggressively, and that Clement defeated his opponent in less than an hour. Perhaps I am overestimating the pulse-pounding intensity and drama of reading a game of chess, but I was disappointed that many of the matches played in the story are skipped over almost in their entirety. In fact, late into the novel, the themes of chess get intertwined with and then engulfed by exceptionally conventional religious themes. This is best illustrated by the novel's explanation for why Emil is the supposedly unbeatable player that he is. He doesn't play according to established chess theory or strategy so much as he treats chess as a form of prayer, and lets the hand of God, or angels as he proposes at one point, decide his moves for him. When the story does try to focus on and justify the chess theme, it does so awkwardly. The narrative conceit about why Emil Clement chooses to put himself at substantial risk in order to play chess is difficult to swallow. His love of the game is treated as a quirk of his character at first. He loves the game so much that he would rather die than never play chess again. This would be fine if not for the context surrounding his character. Clement was brought to Auschwitz with his mother and his wife and 2 children. He is separated from them upon entry into the camp and never sees his children again afterwards. It seems bizarre that the loss of his family is given only momentary scenes of sorrow in between plot points in his main character arc, whereas what would really bring him to despair would be to never play his favorite board game again. I understand that Donahue needed to justify why Clement would be risking his life and well-being in order to play chess, but I feel as though any other possible justification, regardless of its absurdity, would have sufficed better than the one that was used. I would never have bought this novel if I had thought that the idea of a story about playing chess set in Auschwitz was an inexcusably absurd premise, but unfortunately the execution in the Death's Head Chess Club seems to draw far more attention to the absurdity rather than the believability of the premise. This ultimately works against the novel's deadpan serious tone, which seeks to tell an intense and dramatic story where comedy and levity is sparsely included. This is ultimately where the conflict between the 2 main focuses of the novel rears the hardest. The chess theme is playful, inventive, and carries with it the spectacle of sport. The Auschwitz theme is dark, brutal, and carries with it a dreary, oppressive air of horror and anxiety. These 2 themes can combine together in a complementary way, however in this instance they seem to reduce each other. The real-life horrors of Auschwitz seem to dampen the playful spectacle of high-stakes chess, and the playful nature of chess tends more often than not to remove the gravitas of such a bleak setting. The writing style relies extremely heavily on fragmented narrative and the storyteller as a framing device. The main plot involving Jewish prisoner Emil Watchmaker Clement and SS officer Paul Meissner jumps a few times in every chapter between several different time frames. The main 2 are 1962 in Amsterdam, many years after the war during an international chess tournament, and 1944 in Camp Auschwitz, where the bulk of the narrative takes place. Occasionally, the story will deviate to different times and places, such as 1933, to reveal smaller stories relevant to the characters, such as how Emil Clement met and proposed to his wife. Often these scenes before 1962 will be framed as stories being shared between Clement, Meissner, and a 3rd character named Wilhelm Schwenninger. The novel will advance the plot of the chess club in Auschwitz and swiftly end the scene when all relevant details are known to the reader in order for the characters in Amsterdam to comment on the story so far. This style is a disadvantage for the novel as many scenes end too abruptly and feel as though there is a lack of chronology between them. Failing to maintain a long scene without interruptions comes across as an amateur effort, as though Donahue didn't know how to naturally progress the story from one scene to another, and so decided to bridge the gap between them by cutting the reader's perspective back to a framing device whenever a scene needed to end. This may have been unnoticeable if it had been used for merely a few quick scenes, but unfortunately this pervades through the majority of the novel, and I wasn't able to find myself adapting to it. The one advantage of this style is that it keeps the pace of the writing on high for the bulk of the story as it skips from relevant scene to relevant scene. The lack of flavorful mood-setting poetic language in favor of plot-advancing scenes of action and dialogue make this an easy read, helped by the framing of Clement and Meissner of the most important parts of the story in the interspersed cuts to 1962. While I can praise this novel for its ease of reading, it can also consequently fall into the trap of using cliches from time to time, which get more egregious as the novel progresses. The most damning of these is when the main protagonist rounds out his character arc by declaring that his friend helped him find the thing he had thought he had lost forever: himself. Something which I feel I have to mention is that by the middle of the novel I was beginning to notice the lack of a female presence in the story. The bulk of the cast are men, with the female characters being either relegated to only one or a few scenes, or otherwise mentioned tangentially as the prostitutes whom some of the male characters occasionally have sex with. I don't mind male-dominated stories, and I also don't mind prostitutes, but I couldn't help but ponder that the story of a prostitute who worked in Auschwitz, or even the story of what happened to Emil Clement's wife, mother, and children had to be at least equally as compelling as the story of chess being played in Auschwitz. Considering that the novel is of a middling length and as it stands contains incidental characters and scenes anyway, I think it would have benefited from including more women as characters in order to diversify the range of themes and experiences that the novel was able to examine. After all, the suffering in Auschwitz was not a gender-specific experience. Discovering that the Death's Head Chess Club was a first published novel for Donahue was surprising to me, but it also helped me to think differently about many of the criticisms that I had for the novel originally. Certain criticisms, such as the awkward melding of opposing themes, the scattershot writing style, and the frequent use of cliches series becomes more understandable when going into the story with the knowledge that this is the author's first novel, and will also make the surprising and well-realized elements all the more impressive. Reading The Death's Head Chess Club was occasionally compelling, but for the most part it had the appeal of a novelty. If you can suspend your awkwardness about the Auschwitz setting, then the novel can be entertaining and enjoyable, and sometimes you will definitely find yourself impressed with the creative ways that historical facts are woven into the story. But don't expect this to be the novel that ignites your inner history nerd and compels you to research into the period, as with authors like Sebastian Faulks, Hilary Mantel, Kim Scott, or Vargas Llosa. I'm going to give this novel a recommendation to readers looking to get into historical fiction, as it is an easy read, but for fans of the genre, this novel doesn't promise anything that you won't find done better by a more experienced author. If you have other World War II era novels, or novels that incorporate a chess theme into their story that you'd like to recommend, post them in the comments below. Also check out the artist who did the background for this video, as well as the musician who produced the background music. Links to their content are in the description. Thanks for watching.